Fantastic. So thank you so much for coming. We are, as I said, really happy to see everybody, but just to mention that this event is particularly for people who are looking after babies under 12 months. And as well as that, we'd just like to remind you that we can't give any specific advice for circumstances or worries. And if you are concerned about anything, then the best thing to do is to go and speak to a health professional. And finally, before we move on to more practical instructions to do with the event, we'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that the area of parenting and infant care is one that carries a lot of gendered expectations and gendered language. And we affirm the right for everybody to have access to care that is relevant and respectful to them. So care and advice about infant sleep. So in a minute, I'll hand over to Helen, who will introduce herself and the two other panelists, and we'll vote on the top 10 questions. We'll whittle them down and decide which ones to tackle first, and then we will answer them in order of that. But for now, hopefully my screen will change. There you go. So I've just got a couple of things to note, that closed captions have been enabled, but you'll probably have to change the settings yourself if you want to be able to see them. That'll mean that each speaker is subtitled in the bottom. We're going to record this event and make it available on YouTube, and we'll put it up as soon as we can, so it'll probably be there in the next couple of days. And then finally, many of you have already managed to use the chat, which is fantastic. We're going to try and use that for comments and queries, and like I said, Sophie and myself will try and keep on top of that, but if we don't get to everything, then please don't worry. We will hopefully have time to, or we'll give you the details of how to contact us if you have anything specific you want to follow up with. And a final thank you to the Economic and Social Research Council and the Durham University ESRC Impact and Acceleration Account. So they're running the 2023 Festival of Social Science, and this is one of the events. And there are events online and in person all around the UK until the 17th of November. So make sure to have a look at what else is available on their website. Great, so I'm going to stop sharing now and double check that this is recording so that we can, yes, definitely recording. Helen, over to you, thanks so much.
All right, great. Thanks, Laura, for doing all of that and for setting everything up. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. I'm Helen Ball. I'm Professor of Anthropology at Durham University, and I'm the Director of the Durham Infancy and Sleep Centre, which is a research centre where we've been studying parent-baby sleep for the past 28 years. This is where the Durham Parent Infant Sleep Lab is housed, and it's also home to the Baby Sleep Information Source, which is our website and outreach programme. So I'm delighted to introduce my co-panellists this evening, who are Dr. Vicky Thomas and Dr. Anna Pease. Anna, if you'd like to wave so people can see you. Anna is an NIHR research fellow at Bristol University Medical School, where she runs the Baby Sleep Project, which is developing and evaluating tools for SUDI prevention and baby sleep safety with high-risk families in the southwest of England. Anna also chairs the Lullaby Trust Scientific Advisory Group. And Vicky, would you like to wave so the camera comes to you? Thank you. Vicky's a consultant paediatrician at the Great North Children's Hospital in Newcastle and has a special interest in infant behaviour, growth and nutrition. She's a trustee of the First Steps Nutrition Trust, co-chair of the Hospital Infant Feeding Network, and serves on the Lullaby Trust's Research Grants Committee. So thanks very much to everyone who's joining us today and to all of you who participated in our interactive question gathering exercise last month. We got lots of questions, which if you've been following our progress, you'll know that we sort of boiled those down to a list of questions that were voted on last week to come up with the top questions that we're going to share with you, top 10 questions that we're going to share with you now. And we're going to give you the opportunity to choose which questions we proceed with to begin with, and we'll just carry on talking about the topics that come up until we run out of time. So Laura, would you like to share the poll of the top 10 questions that came out of the survey last week?
Yeah, hopefully you
So
can
please
see
vote
that
for your top question. You get to vote for one, and the one that gets the most votes we'll start with this evening. Okay, do we have a good amount of votes there, Laura?
Yeah, we've got over 80% of people have voted, so I can end it. And
Okay then, so have we got these in order? Now, can you just, are you able to sort them into the top questions?
no, I don't think so, sorry.
No, right. Well, we'll go down and we'll have a look then at which ones have got the most votes. All right, so it looks to me that the one that's got the most votes is the one that we started talking about before we went live, as one of the few questions that doesn't have much in the way of evidence behind it. So, oh, I can see these numbers have changed since I just finished looking at them. Let's go back again. Yeah, so I think the one with the highest number of votes is the one about the contact naps. So how can I transition away from contact naps, and at what age should my baby sleep in their own room? So I think Anna's probably best placed to answer the second half about babies sleeping in their own room. I'm going to start, and feel free to chip in, the other two of you, about transitioning away from contact naps. I am not aware of any research that has been done on how you stop contact napping. Is anybody else? No, Vicky's shaking her head. No. So all I think we can talk about this one from is sort of our general extrapolation from what we know from other research. So I would say babies like contact naps. And of course, one of the issues with many of these questions that we need to kind of remind ourselves is that this may depend on the age of the baby about which the question is being asked. So very small babies, newborn babies, babies in the first 3 months or so crave physical contact. They really want to know where that caregiver is, to feel safe, to feel secure. And so contact napping, being in contact, is a place where babies easily can relax and fall asleep. So babies like to do that. And I don't think in the first 3 months there's any reason why we would encourage someone not to contact nap, so long as the adult is awake while the baby is sleeping on them. The key issue is that the adult is awake, making sure that the baby's airway is clear. As babies get older, of course, contact napping becomes much more onerous for the parents because they're much heavier and they're harder to hold, and you don't necessarily want to be sitting there with an older baby sleeping on you all day. So my suggestion would be to move that nap environment to some place where you can lie down safely side by side. And start to transition away from contact napping by doing side-by-side napping, and then moving a little further away, and then maybe sitting on the bed and kind of like keeping a hand in contact with the baby until you're able to move them either into their own bed, into their own cot, or you can do something else while you're sitting there next to them if they're on another bed. Vicky, what would you say?
So I would agree with you that contact napping is very natural, and with my significantly more basic than yours understanding of anthropology and evolution, I also think it's important to remember that this is how babies survive. They are not aware that they're in a safe 2023 house with no threats or predators around. This is the evolutionary mechanism that has kept babies safe for millennia, and the fact that we're in different setup now has not made it into the infant brain, and I don't think that's going to happen. One solution that some families find really useful is using slings, and that can be a really good solution for those babies who really need contact and have a parent or caregiver who needs to be up and about and doing something active. And I can also see that in the chat, somebody's talked about outdoor pram naps and the normality of that in Scandinavian countries. So I guess a lot of this is about being creative. So much of our impression, I think, in UK society particularly, is about sleep must happen in a cot, in a set way, in a set at a set time. And this idea that other forms of sleep, whether it's in a pram or a sling or on a caregiver, I've sometimes heard to as junk sleep. And I don't think there's any evidence that would back that up. Contact sleep is good sleep for the baby. It's, I think, the challenge of it for the caregiver is what we end up talking about more and more.
Thanks, Vicky. Anna, do you want to tackle the moving the baby into their own room?
Sure. I think there's certainly not much evidence in the way of contact naps, but apart from what's already been said. I think the key thing here is about transitions, isn't it? You want to change what's already happening to be something different, and we can make all sorts of speculation about the reasons for that, but there are a multitude of reasons why parents need to change something that's in existence in terms of a routine. So things like slings, prams, safe bed sharing, if it can be done, all of those things are good suggestions. I had assumed contact naps were the naps that happen during the day. I had assumed that the need to transition away from them was to do with needing to get stuff done or needing to be, in a different place with your arms free to do things or go to work or that sort of stuff. But that might not be the case. So it really is about, I guess, the reasons for it and then how you do it gradually and making sure, like we said, about infants knowing that they have a responsive carer close by. And that is actually one of the most protective factors for sudden infant death syndrome, is a responsive carer. And it's the reason why the advice in terms of proximity is to stay in the same room as the baby for all sleeps, day and night, for the first 6 months. And then after that, and that's only really because the research has used that cutoff point of the age of the baby to look at SIDS risk, where babies that were in their own room at night after that age, that risk didn't really exist. But that's not to say that there might not be reasons why you would want to keep that proximity going for a bit longer. There's nothing to say that that's what you should do at 6 months, is right, off you go into your own room now. I've talked to lots of families where they've had a rough start, or they've been a preemie, or they've got twins, or there's all sorts of things happening where they just feel like they just want them around, and there's nothing wrong with that either. So 6 months is what's in the advice. I think before then, the worry is that you'd be messing with that kind of need for safety and closeness. And there's a bit of evidence about making sure that trust bond develops in that way, and that's to do with proximity. So 6 months is what I would say was the earliest I would start thinking about that. But it's up to you. And then there's space issues as well. You might not have another room to put a baby. It might be, that actually they need to be in that room because that's the only space that you've got. So I think that's all to be considered.
Thanks, Anna. All right, then. I think we've given that one a good airing, as probably as good as we're going to be able to. So let's move on to another one. I noticed that the next top one, there's two with 21 votes. One of those is about daytime naps and how daytime naps and activities affect nighttime sleep. So this is something that I talk about quite a lot when I'm talking to health professionals. Somebody asked in the chat how much information about some of these topics health professionals are given on average. My experience over the last 20 odd years is health professionals don't really get very much training about infant sleep at all. And we've been doing some with some groups of staff. And they say that this is the first time that they've actually had any training about infant sleep. So we can talk about that a bit later if you want to. But about daytime naps and how daytime naps and activities affect nighttime sleep, one of the things that I talk about a lot when I'm doing training with health professionals is what's going on in the daytime and how it might be affecting what's happening in the nighttime. Now, the first thing to remember, I think, when we're talking about daytime naps is that for the first 3 months, babies can't really differentiate between daytime naps and nighttime sleep. So for the first few months, all sleep is sleep. There's no sort of differentiation between what's a nap and what's nighttime sleep, because babies don't have a circadian rhythm. They're sort of, their body is starting to develop a circadian rhythm during the first 3 months, but you can't really see any evidence of it in any kind of measures that you might take of a baby's physiology, etc., until they get into their 3rd month. And by the time they get into their 3rd month, you can begin to see certain things more featuring more prominently during daylight hours, and other things happening more prominently during nighttime hours. And one of those things is that they start to stay awake for a bit longer during daylight hours and to sleep a bit more during nighttime hours. And this is the beginning of what we call the process of sleep consolidation, which is when sleep kind of like aggregates in dark hours and wakefulness aggregates into the day. Many babies don't get their full circadian months, even up to a year. So it's a slow gradual process, everything kind of coming online. However, as sleep begins to consolidate and babies take a bit more sleep during the night and a bit less sleep during the day, then one of the things you can start to think about what's happening with daytime naps and how it might be affecting nighttime sleep. So all of us have a 24-hour total sort of sleep maximum, the maximum amount of sleep that we're ever going to take, our normal sleep quota or our normal sleep needs. And babies are the same in that every baby will have an amount of sleep that it needs to take every day. And that will change over the course of the first year. It decreases as babies get older. And it tends to decrease a bit more during the day than it does during the night. And you can start to think about how much sleep is my baby taking during the daytime and how much sleep is it getting at night. And do I want to try and help it, him or her, I don't like calling babies it, do I want to try and help him or her move some of their sleep around the clock so that they're taking a little bit more sleep at night and a little bit less sleep during the day? So what happens with daytime naps can affect what happens with nighttime sleep because of the buildup of sleep pressure. So sleep pressure is this concept of getting sleepy as you stay awake for longer. And we, of course, can stay awake as adults for most of the day and then start to feel sleepy in the evening. That's the buildup of our sleep pressure. It's chemicals in the brain called adenosines that need clearing out of the brain every so often, and they get cleared out when we're asleep. Babies' sleep pressure builds up much more quickly than adults. So if a baby builds up its sleep pressure to the point where it needs to go to sleep, and then it has a big long nap in the middle of the day, it drops its sleep pressure back down to 0, and then it'll start building its sleep pressure up. And then if it takes another big long nap, it'll drop its sleep pressure back down to 0. As babies get into the second third of their first year, 4 to 8 months, you can start to experiment with just letting babies use to take the edge off their sleep pressure, but not drop it all the way back to 0, because then their sleep pressure will keep climbing have a nap, take the edge off, keep climbing, have a nap, take the edge off, keep climbing towards nighttime, so that when they go to bed, they'll take a longer stretch of sleep to kind of alleviate that sleep pressure. So daytime naps do affect nighttime sleep, but you can work with them to think about how you might help your baby kind of like take the edge off their sleep pressure during the day, but not nap for inordinate long amount of time that they drop their sleep pressure back to zero and kind of have to start all over again. All right, did that make sense to people? Vicky and Anna, do you have anything that you want to add to that?
I have a question, actually.
Yeah.
This is great. This makes so much sense to me. Is there, if the sleep pressure builds up towards when you want them to go to sleep at nighttime, would it therefore make sense to, because is it true that then first like nighttime sleep's often the longest one? And we hear that anecdotally from parents. So sometimes parents have said, well, I've pushed their first nighttime sleep to when I'm going to bed anyway. So I'm getting the most out of that bit. Is that something has any?
Yeah, so I don't know, I can't remember whether one of the other so one of the other questions that we were asked was, how can I manage sleep disruption and protect my mental health? And one of the things that you can think about doing is aligning your deepest sleep period with your baby's longest sleep period, because sleep disruption feels much, much worse if your sleep's disrupted in the first 4 hours of the night, which is when you're getting your deepest sleep, compared to if it's disrupted in the second half of the night, which is when you're doing more of your REM sleep or dreaming sleep. So if you can align your baby's longest sleep period at the start of the night with your deep sleep period, then you will benefit from that. You'll feel the difference in terms of, even if your sleep is disrupted, kind of like after that, it feels a lot less difficult to cope with than if you're being woken up from your deep sleep in the first part of the night. Okie dokie. Right, let's find one that I don't have to
Helen, just before you move on, there's a few people in the chat who are asking, how do you know you've just taken the edge off? How do you know if their sleep pressure might be approaching zero? How do you know? People are asking, do you wake a baby up after a certain period of time? How would you kind of deal with that? So
the idea is not that you wake the baby up. The idea is that you think about the baby's sleep environment being one where it will arouse from sleep when it comes into the later stages of sleep, after it's taken off the edge off of its sleep pressure. So it might only have, one sleep cycle, for instance, of 45 to 60 minutes. But if you put babies in dark rooms for sleep during the daytime, it encourages it. Well, first of all, it disrupts their circadian rhythm, because they're going from light to dark to light to dark, and they don't kind of like get that 24-hour cycle. But also, quiet dark rooms don't stimulate the baby's brain to kind of like monitor what's going on around it while it's asleep, and to arouse in response to noise or light or some kind of stimulation. So keeping the baby, as Anna said, where you are during the day has a double benefit. It's protective for SIDS, but it also means that they don't go into such a deep sleep that they have a mini nighttime sleep for like several hours. But I mean, and I'm not talking about doing this in the first few months, because in the first few months, babies need to sleep plenty during the day as well as during the night. But as they're getting older in the second half of the first year, then having shorter naps can help with developing sleep consolidation and pushing sleep around the clock.
Yeah, I put my hand up. Right.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I put my hand up just to say, I sometimes see this in parents who almost describe what I call trying to charm the sleep fairies. So, all of life stops while they change absolutely everything in order to try and maximize the amount of daytime sleep and get the longest possible period. And it actually becomes it's firstly, it has the impacts that you've described on the process of sleep development, but it also, I think, becomes a really big challenge for parents, because they feel that their baby will only sleep under certain circumstances, and anything that deviates from that is impossible. And then they get tied to their house to a very particular setup, which can in itself be incredibly hampering.
Good points. Good points. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next top question. So the other one that got 21 votes, which is, do I need to train or teach my baby how to fall asleep? This is one where there's a huge amount of conflicting advice out there for parents. But do you want me to go first, or would one of you two like to go first this time?
I feel like it's a test. I think you should go first.
Right. From my point of view as an anthropologist and a biologist, babies know how to sleep when they're born. They've been sleeping in the uterus for many months. So we don't need to teach them to sleep. What we may need to do is help them to achieve the conditions in which they can sleep. And that's about making sure that it's calm and they can relax. You know, when your sleep pressure is really high, unless something is stopping the action of sleep pressure sending you to sleep, then you should be able to just easily fall asleep. However, the action of sleep pressure can be blocked by fear, by pain, by discomfort, by being frustrated, by being angry, by being worked up in some kind of way. And it works in the same way for a baby. If a baby is distressed or unhappy, it can't calm down, she or he can't calm down and go to sleep. They need help to calm down and go to sleep. So when people talk about teaching their baby to go to sleep, to my mind, what we're talking about there is figuring out the strategies that help to calm down a baby so that sleep pressure can take over and they can go to sleep in kind of a normal way. Training, I think, is something completely different. And that is about trying to stop a baby or a child signaling when they wake up. And that it implies, for the most part, that they're sleeping by themselves in a room by themselves. They're waking, they're realizing they're on their own, they're calling for some attention, and the parents want that behavior to stop. They don't want them to call for their attention in the middle of the night. So that is about trying to dissuade the baby or the small child from signaling in the middle of the night by not responding positively to what the child is asking for. In my mind, that is a very confusing thing to do to a child under 12 months old, because they don't understand what's going on and they don't understand why you're being loving and kind and responsive during the day, but you're ignoring their needs during the nighttime. Personally, there is certainly evidence that sleep training works to stop babies signaling during the night or small children signaling during the night, but there isn't evidence that it increases the amount of sleep they get. It increases the amount of sleep that mothers report that they get, or that it decreases mothers' postnatal depression scores. So there are reasons why it might be a useful tool in some families. But from my point of view, I think a child needs to understand what's happening. And if you're telling it, if you're not responding to it in the night, it needs to be able to understand what you're saying to it. So I would not do it until a child is verbal, personally, but that's my point of view. Vicky and Anna, what would you say about training? So, the other thing I was going to say about teaching babies to sleep, there are lots of strategies about teaching babies to sleep by sort of making a very consistent routine and helping the baby kind of learn that now is the time that it's expected to to go to bed and to go to sleep, etc., etc. That is not teaching the baby to sleep, in my view. That is teaching the baby to sleep at the time that you need it to sleep, or you have decided that it should sleep. And those two things are somewhat different. So Vicky and Anna.
So if I may jump in, because I do have some thoughts about this as a paediatrician. And the first thing to say is that I think that our role as parents is to facilitate children's development, but we cannot make it happen. And in the same way as children will walk and talk in their own time, and there are things that we can do that will help to bring that on. And similarly, unfortunately, in my experience, children who experience maltreatment may not walk and talk in the way that we would expect them to until they're in a safe and secure environment. But we can't make that walking or talking happen before a child is developmentally ready. And sleep, I think, also falls under the heading of a developmental progression. I think what you've said, Helen, is absolutely right. You can call, I think, rhythms rather than necessarily routines help to signal to babies and small children, this is what we're doing now and this is what you can expect next. But I think that a rhythm and a flow through daily life is quite different from a routine that is enforced on a child. And often I find families will tell me they've found their own flow that works for them, and that there's a degree of flexibility within that. But usually that one thing happens after another, but is not necessarily anchored to timing on the clock. One of the things that I do encounter is parents who are worried that there will be an adverse health or developmental outcome from their child if they don't act to make sleep happen in a way that they have been messaged to that it should be happening. And I think there has been sometimes some scaremongering about the association between sleep challenges and subsequent diagnoses of neurodiversity, for example. Now, having done paediatrics for 20 years now, and having had the great privilege of watching a number of patients go from very small babies now graduating out of my care and into adult services, I think challenges with sleep and other behavioural aspects and with feeding, yes, they can be a feature of neurodiversity, but they aren't produced. Neurodiversity is not produced by early childhood sleep. Neurodiversity can cause problems with early childhood sleep, but the cause and effect, I think, is often misrepresented. So for me as a paediatrician, I think we should be doing everything we can to facilitate nurturing, caring, safe sleep for our babies and children. But I don't think that there is any onus at all on a parent to get them into a strict routine and to make something happen which the child is not ready to have happening. And my reading of the literature is exactly as you say, Helen, that you will not stop a child waking, you'll just stop them signalling that they're awake by some of the methods that are recommended and used.
You're on mute, Helen.
How about I try unmuting before I speak? So I think we should move on to another topic. Thanks, Vicky. The time's flying by, which I knew it would once we got started. But I am going to go to how does feeding affect sleep? And I think there's a number of things that we could talk about here. But Vicky, one of Vicky's special areas of interest is infant feeding. So why don't I let you start, and then I'll give Anna a turn, and maybe to talk about the places in which mothers and babies sometimes find themselves sleeping based on their feeding behavior, and if necessary, I'll mop up at the end.
Okay, so yes, as ever, I have thoughts. So when we look at the literature, we do see that, firstly, if you're breaking this down into formula milk versus breastfeeding, that initially, in the early days, I think we do get reports of more wakes and more feeds from breastfed infants, but also that parents report more the same, or in some cases more sleep with their breastfed infants. And I think any of us who have given night care to a baby can see how that might well work out, because often breastfeeding is a relatively low intervention approach to getting your baby back off to sleep. You know, if you're doing safe bed sharing, you may not even need to move, versus having to prepare, make up, feed overnight. By the time we get to about 6 to 12 months, what we're seeing from Amy Brown's work is there's actually no difference in number of wake-ups between breastfeeding and formula feeding infants. So we know that there's not a big difference there. What Amy Brown's work there did uncover is that babies who took more food or milk in during the day fed less overnight, but they still woke just as frequently. They were just less likely to be fed. And then the other bit of research that I think sometimes gets pulled into this, and certainly had quite a lot of headlines back in 2018 when it was first published, was a study called EAT. And EAT was primarily actually looking at early introduction of potentially allergenic foods and the impact on allergies for babies. But one of the papers that they produced as part of that larger piece of work looked at whether introducing solid foods from the age of 3 months actually impacted on how much babies slept. And there was a lot of fanfare in certain areas of the press at the time saying that early introduction of solids would help, was the fix. But actually, digging down into that research, the maximum amount of extra sleep that families were getting from introducing solids to their babies from 3 months was 16 minutes per night at the age of 6 months. And this was parent reported sleep. So you've got to think about, if you are undertaking an intervention, are you more likely to report an improvement in the situation, if that makes sense? So we do know that there's sometimes real difficulty in getting truly accurate information from parent questionnaires. And I think for me, there are significant concerns about that early introduction of solid food. There is a reason that people often worry that the guidelines have changed. The guidelines in the UK have been pretty solid for about coming on to 20 years now, that the introduction of solids is suggested from 6 months onwards. So there are potential downsides to introducing solids at that 3-month mark, which I don't think could be justified by an extra 16 minutes of sleep at the age of 6 months. Which I see Helen is smiling at, although I have to say I would probably have given my eye teeth for an extra 16 minutes of sleep on occasion, but those are my reservations. So ultimately, I think we can say that no, the ways that we feed babies actually don't have a huge impact on how they sleep. But what we hear is that well-meaning family and friends often think that that is the ultimate fix, and that's what you might hear from your neighbour or a lady in the street or your own mum or your mother-in-law. But hopefully I've now given you the information to rebuff that a little bit, if introducing solids or changing the method in which you're feeding your baby isn't what you feel you want to do.
Thanks very much, Vicky. Anna, do you want to bring in anything about safe sleeping around this topic?
I think there's a couple of questions in the chat about night feeds, and this side that you know, a lot of parents get told that if they're still doing feeds at night after a certain age, that can impact on the wakefulness. I don't know what there is to say about that really, but maybe Vicky has some thoughts.
I think it's hugely variable. Actually, there are some children that or babies that want to feed every time they wake up, and if they're close enough to their mom's breasts to be able to, they will. but then there are others who don't seem bothered about feeding during the night. So again, in terms of research, I can't say that there's any strong evidence coming to mind that that a certain type of practice is going to change that or not change that. I think it's pretty much related to individual babies and their sort of the I don't want to say habits they get into, because it's not habits, but what they expect, what they get used to expecting have happened. So I think, you know, it is certainly possible when you're past the phase of establishing breastfeeding to not feed the baby every time it wakes up in the night. There's certainly plenty of studies who have done those sort of feeding babies drops of water in darkened rooms to make it as boring as possible and encourage them to go back to sleep, who have shown similar outcomes to the ones Vicky was talking about, you know, that you might get an extra 10 or 16 minutes kind of sleep out of a night. But I think if you're in that phase of you've gotten to the second half of the first year and your child is feeding frequently during the night because they're sleeping next to you and it's easy for them to get on the boob, and you've decided that you've had enough and you don't want to, and you want to night wean, then, you know, that's your decision, your choice. There are ways to accomplish that in quicker or less quick ways. The quickest way to do it, probably, this is anecdotal evidence from families that I have talked to, is to just leave the child in the bed with the partner sometime in the second half of the first year, and let them be cuddled, let them be comforted, let them have the physical presence, but not the breast milk that goes along with it. And it takes a couple of nights to kind of break that association. It's a bit traumatic, but it's not leaving the child to scream by themselves. So there are ways in which you can effect that, but it depends, you know, what you feel is right for your baby and why you feel they're feeding at night frequently, and whether that's too frequent for you to be able to cope with. So
Thanks.
Can we go to a couple of questions that Anna might have a bit more input on? Anna, one of the questions that got quite a few votes was, why do health professionals avoid discussing bed sharing, and how can it be done safely? Would you like to make a stab at that one?
For sure, absolutely. The first bit is fairly easy to answer. They should all be discussing where your baby sleeps with you and having that conversation with you. There have been some changes recently that will help, I hope, help professionals feel more confident having those conversations, because the NHS webpage is updated, the Lullaby Trust is on board, and we've got obviously the BASIS website too with information on there. I think there's one myth that I would like to bust, and maybe Vicky will have an opinion on this as well, but from the evidence that I've seen on co-sleeping in SIDS, and that's where co-sleeping kind of gets dragged into the conversation, because it's arguments between researchers about whether or not it's safe at all and can it be done safely, and that's, you know, where all this has come from. And one of the things that gets bandied around a bit that I've seen is you can only bed share, that's sharing an adult bed with a baby when the adult and the baby are asleep, if you're breastfeeding. And I would say that I think that's a myth. Actually, the evidence that we have on bed sharing indicates quite strongly that the advice about bed sharing applies to all babies, regardless of the feeding method. So whether the baby is being fed with a bottle or express milk in a bottle, or if they're breastfeeding, the advice about bed sharing is the same. And there are certain situations where researchers agree that the risk is much higher. So for example, being asleep with the baby on a sofa, everyone agrees that's quite a high risk situation. If you're bed sharing when there's alcohol involved, if anyone in the bed smokes, or if you're bed sharing with a baby that was born below birth weight, premature, and is under 3 months old, that again would be a situation where the advice would be to avoid bed sharing in that situation. Then the Lullaby Trust and everybody else have kind of combined that evidence to try to offer sensible, safer bed sharing guidance. Because what we know about reality is that looking after a young infant at night is really hard work. And it's also doesn't involve researchers being there at night making decisions for you. It's up to the parents and the caregivers about what to do. And they have a right to make those decisions for themselves. They also have a right to the information about the things that make sleep environments more and less risky. So there's some things you can do to make that sleep environment less risky that's evidence-based. So that is making sure that the baby sleeps face up on their back. Pretty solid evidence now that back sleeping is really protective for sudden infant death syndrome. So that's one that there's a lot of consensus on. The other one is about having a clear face, making sure that baby has a clear face. Not a lot of people realize that babies are preferential nose breathers when they're asleep for the first few months at least. And that means that anything covering the tiny little nostrils can be not so great. So making sure that they have a clear face, so things like taking the pillows, moving the pillows out of the way, making sure there isn't a heavy duvet that could cover the baby, that sort of advice as well. And then there's the kind of sensible home safety advice that can go along with a baby asleep on an adult bed, making sure that there's nowhere for them to fall, roll, trap, get wedged, all of that sort of stuff. And those risks change as the baby gets older. So when you've got a more mobile baby in an adult bed, it's time to start thinking about, are they going to be able to wriggle off and fall here or get trapped somewhere? And also thinking about the firmness of the mattress, making sure that it's level, it's flat, it's a mattress that's in good condition, all those sorts of things as well. It's not too soft. I think, back in the day, there was things like water beds were very popular, or, these kind of molded mattresses that quite went through phases of those. But I think it's, in general, it's parents' decisions about where their babies sleep. It's up to health professionals to have those conversations with them and to exchange information and make sure that they've understood what you're planning on doing and why, and that they've offered you the best available evidence about how to reduce the risks in all those sleep locations. And that's what you need, really. And also to think about the times when stuff might happen by accident, because we've all been there. Like, everyone that's ever looked after a baby at night has found themselves asleep when they didn't mean to be asleep. It happens. Especially if you're breastfeeding, I think, especially if you have a baby that is awake a lot during the night, especially if you've got a lot going on in your own life, sometimes you do fall asleep accidentally. So planning for safety and thinking, give yourself the peace of mind that your baby's going to be safe while they're asleep so you can get proper rest. Make sure they're in a safe space, but don't feel like there's only one safe space for your baby. You can create that safe space wherever you are. And that kind of helps with like emergency situations or, massive disruptions to the routine where you might not be in your own house without expecting it, that sort of stuff as well. Your baby needs to be face up, face clear, close to a responsive carer. And if you can make that happen wherever you are, you can go to sleep safe in the knowledge you've done everything you can at that point. So that's what I would say.
Thanks, Em. I see there's a couple of questions just gone in the chat while you were talking. One was about breastfeeding mothers and the way in which we sleep with our babies. And that's something that kind of came out of some video research that we did probably, nearly 20 years ago now, and has been corroborated by other studies that have done videos of mums and babies who sleep together, who are breastfed and not breastfeeding. And what we found, and it was only a relatively small study, was that breastfeeding mums breastfeeding mums automatically got into this C position, curled up around their babies and making a space for their babies to sleep in with their bodies, whereas mums who had never breastfed didn't automatically do that all the time. So that was where that C-shape kind of information has come from. It's not something that appears in the SIDS case control studies, because nobody's ever asked about what position was the mum sleeping in if the baby died in the bed, etc., but it's from observational video studies. The second question is about low birth weight and preterm infants, and I think this is a really important one to talk about. So Anna, can I call on you again to to just talk about co-sleeping with low birth weight and prem babies?
Yeah, for sure. I think the official advice from the Lullaby Trust is not to avoid co-sleeping in that situation, because we know that with SIDS, there's sort of three things that we think combine together to create the biggest risk, and one of those is a vulnerable infant. And we don't you can't say for sure this, you know, to everybody, this infant is vulnerable, this infant isn't. We don't really know enough about that yet, but we do know that babies that are born preterm or low birth weight are in that more vulnerable category. So they've already got that going on for them. So that would be something that you would want to kind of to think about, making sure you follow all the safer sleep advice, especially for those babies. After 3 months, I wouldn't say, oh yes, it's okay, or not, no, it's not okay. I think that risk isn't there or not there. It's always kind of on a spectrum, and our ability to cope with how much risk is acceptable is different for different reasons across different people. I would say that the advice about co-sleeping isn't for me to tell you whether or not it's safe. It's for me to pass on the evidence about making it as safe as possible. And if you're making that decision to be co-sleeping with an infant, that you've followed all that advice and making it as safe as possible. And to know when when the risks are higher, and the risks will be higher for a low birth weight or premature baby. And that's why the advice is like that. But again, as I said before, you're going to be in situations where you might not mean to, or you might just need to, or think that you want to for that one time. And I think even in those situations, whatever else is going on, keeping the space around the baby as safe as possible is where that's going to give you peace of mind and help you get more rest without worrying too much about it. I think. Is that enough of a dodging the question?
Some of these are really difficult questions to kind of like give black and white answers to, because there are no black and white answers. They're things that the context in which something is happening really makes a difference. And it's only the parent on the day that can make the decision, because we're not there. We don't know what's happening. I think we are getting close to the end of our session. Is there anything that you think we should have covered, Laura, that was in the questions that we've kind of like been negligent and missed out?
I don't think so. I think we've done a really good job, but if we have a look at them later and we decide that there is anything, we can share some information, maybe some
I could just answer the one that popped up just now. Natalie wanted to know what are the other two big things: smoking and alcohol use. And it's important just to point out that some of those things they're not fixed. So if there's smoking, then obviously that's the time when the risk is always going to be higher, especially smoking during pregnancy as well. But alcohol use can come and go, and that can be quite hard if you're a regular bed sharer following all of the advice as best you can. But then there's this one night where you're the disruption to the routine, and you're going out or something's happening and you're having a drink. Then it's really important to think about how you're going to maintain safety in that situation. And that would be a situation where we'd say baby needs to be in their own safe space for that sleep.
All righty, we are 1 minute away from dropping into a black hole. So I'm just going to thank everybody very much for contributing to this evening. Vicky and Anna particularly for coming and being brave and sort of answering questions on the front line, for Laura and Sophie behind the scenes doing all of the hard work and getting everything set up. Thank you very much. And to everybody who's joined us. I know that you've all got loads of questions, and in an hour there's no way we're ever going to get to answer all of them, but I hope we've done our best in answering the ones that most people voted for, and you've all learned something useful. But please feel free to take a look at the Baby Sleep Information Source website for more information of this sort, and get in touch with us if there's anything that you've really got a burning question about. But don't forget, we don't give individual advice about babies because we don't know your circumstances and your history. Okay, thanks very much. Would everybody like to sign off?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks very much. Take care.